Why, hello there, Steno Squad, and welcome to the first ever episode of the Steno Certification Podcast Series, where I interview Steno Key participants who have recently passed state and national certification tests. So stay tuned to get all the tips, tricks, and techniques so you can pass your next certification test. On today's episode, our guest is Seidi Mendoza. I first introduced you to Seidi back in January 2022 when she was our Steno Student of the Month. Hello, Seidi. So, the last time you took a certification test, when was that certification test?
Last time I took it was May 20th, so it's been exactly 1 month today.
Which test did you take, or which legs did you take?
I took the RSR, the Q&A, and then the lit portion of the RPR.
And how did that go for you?
It went amazing.
Okay.
I passed both of them, so I passed the RSR, which made me a certified co-reporter, and the RPR as well. So I passed the RPR lit, and now I just need the Q&A and the jury charge.
All right, so now you have your RSR.
Yes.
When did you first take your RSR and Q&A? Because obviously you're taking one leg, so you need 3 legs to have your RSR. When did you take the lit portion of your RSR?
I took the lit portion and the jury charge in March. And then I took the Q&A portion this May, so.
Was it your first time taking the RSR Q&A?
No, it's the second time.
Okay.
I took the RSR, all 3 legs in March, and I passed the lit and the jury charge, and I believe I got an 89 on the Q&A.
Okay.
And then this time around, I got a 95.
Perfect. Let's just focus on the Q&A. Since your Q&A, it was the second time and now you passed. What was it that you did differently that led you to pass in May that you weren't doing in March?
So I hadn't really practiced Q&A until that point. I remember I started Q&A this year, practicing Q&A. So after I really got into it, that's when I was able to see all the improvements, and I was able to pass. That's why I was able to pass the RPR lit as well, because I started focusing on Q&A, whereas before I was just focusing on lit.
Okay, and that's because at Steno Key, you work on lit all the way until chapter 40. And then once you're able to demonstrate you can write that at 180, then you go into Q&A.
That's correct.
Now, we're going to just focus on Q&A now. 1 month before you passed your RSR Q&A, what did your practice routine consist of?
I was practicing at higher speeds than I was used to. I wouldn't do anything less than 225, so up to 240, 260. So anything lower than that seemed extremely slow in comparison. So I think that's what helped the most.
And the month before you passed your Q&A test, were you focused on any particular theory concept or concepts?
I wouldn't say concepts, but I would say I was focused on some briefs. I practice common testimony and jury charge briefs. So, for example, is that correct? That is correct. And ladies and gentlemen, or beyond a reasonable doubt. So, I didn't want to overwhelm myself just before a test, especially since I didn't know what was going to be on it. So, I would just practice common testimony briefs.
A lot of times we're told not to learn any new briefs in the weeks leading up to the test, but you're saying you actually did, and obviously you passed. Why do you think people are told not to try to learn new briefs weeks leading up to their test?
Because it can be overwhelming, and you want to make sure you're actually learning the briefs, not just memorizing them. So, but I mean, I just practice the most common ones. So I wasn't going too deep into it. So I just wanted to make sure I knew the most common ones and to be more efficient when testing. Because up to that point, I mean, I wasn't too familiar with it.
Okay. All right. So that's how you made it less overwhelming is
Yes.
you weren't practicing a million briefs. You just
Yes.
practiced what you felt were the most common ones.
Yes.
Now, let's talk about just testing in general from the how you passed your RSR and how you passed your RPR lit. We're going to just talk about all of them in general.
Okay.
The month leading up to the test, how often would you transcribe your Steno notes?
Oh, all the time. It's a must. I mean, there's no other way to know or correct your mistakes if you don't transcribe your notes.
And would that be for if it was high speed practice as well as if it was testing speed practice or control
Yes,
speed? Okay. So no
all of
matter
them.
no matter what.
Yes, no matter what. Because even though at higher speeds I would make so many mistakes, I would even give myself headaches. But at the end, when I would grade and transcribe my notes, I was able to see exactly what I did wrong or what tripped me up. So I think it's a must. You have to transcribe your notes, no matter what.
And how would you deal with seeing those grades, like those lower grades when you were doing high speeds? How would you let those basically not get to you emotionally?
So it's discouraging at first to see how bad you did, but that's not the final grade. I mean, it is, but you're still working on that file, and you can only improve from that file.
And then what about analyzing your notes, like your actual raw Steno notes? How often would you go into that?
I can't say I've been perfect doing that, but I know I should be doing it more often than I am because when I do analyze them, I mean, I learn so much from my writing just from one take, from maybe a 3 minute file. I learn over uh, 10 or more concepts I need to work on, and that keeps me busy for over a week. So I definitely need to improve with analyzing my notes.
But the month leading up passing these tests, were you analyzing them daily, once a week, once a month? What would you say on
I would
average?
say on average once a week.
Okay. What dictation file would you analyze? What was it if was it a lit file? Was it a jury charge file? Was it a Q&A file? Like what kind of file would you choose to analyze?
Usually lists are the ones that give me I'm able to get more feedback with lists because there's so many different theory concepts with those. Whereas jury charge, there's not as much because it's so repeated. There's so many briefs and phrases. So I feel lit give you more information and you're able to take away more from a lit file than any other file, I believe.
And I know you mentioned that you would transcribe everything no matter what. Does that also mean that you would grade it no matter what?
Yes.
What about so when you were analyzing your notes, what was a concept that you noticed that you struggled with the most?
Oh, I noticed I would struggle so much with initial KB, SB, or STW. Those are, I think, the most I would struggle with the initial side of the keyboard.
Okay, for for those basically those sounds of INT, ENT, INF, those weird combinations.
Yes.
Okay. And so how are you working on those the month before the test?
Since I usually misstroke those, I knew I was gonna either have to two stroke those, or if I didn't, it was gonna be an untranslate. So I would rather two-stroke those and know what I was meaning to write rather than just becoming like a slop and me not being able to figure it out. So I just decided to two-stroke those meanwhile, and I'm planning on working on those. That way, it won't be such an issue. But before the test, I decided to just two-stroke those.
Okay. I think that's very smart. I think too, because you already know Magnum Steno, you're already writing shorter than half of the
Mm-hmm.
people that have already passed the test in this entire world. So two-stroking those, that's not going to be that bad, especially if it takes away that whole stress of trying to master it that month before the test. So I think that was a really good idea, like really, really good idea. And
Mm-hmm.
just because you didn't master it last month doesn't mean that you can't master it this year.
Yes.
So I think that's fantastic. Okay, so what about what that month leading up to the test did, other than practicing at much higher speeds and not going less than the certification speed test, what are some other changes you made to your practice routine, if any?
You know what? I gave myself breaks because before that I was all or nothing, and I think that was affecting my mental health. So before I would practice 7 days a week most of the time, and now I give myself grace and allow myself to do other things other than stand up, which I feel has helped me tremendously.
What did your practice routine consist of the month leading up to these past tests?
So I would practice finger drills for at least 30 minutes. I would add number drills and then names and addresses. And then depending on what I signed up for, I would do that at high speeds and then lower the speed for control and accuracy.
So in the month leading up to passing your lit RSR and jury charge RSR, how much percentage of dictation time did you give to lit and how much percentage of dictation time did you give to jury charge?
Oh, most of it was lit. I would say around that 75. And then jury charge, I mean, because J-Charge consists mostly of briefs and familiar words and briefs that, I mean, phrases that you already know. So I needed practice with more unfamiliar material and dense material as well.
Would you practice lit and jury charge each day that you practiced, or would jury charge be 2 days out of the week, or how was that breakdown?
I would focus on one subject each day. So I didn't want to mix those two because, I mean, it would take me a while to really get into it. So I didn't want to go back and forth. So I would do a few days lit and then maybe during the weekend recharge. And it would vary, but most of the days I would focus on lit and then recharge. Other maybe 3 days out of the week.
So when you signed up for your RSR to take it the first time for jury charge and literature and Q&A, did you feel confident that you were going to pass all three, or how did you feel about them?
I felt more confident just knowing I had already taken the RPR. I went through the process already. I was familiar with the proctor and like testing procedures, so I knew what to expect. And also the RPR, I felt like I was just there. I just needed like a few words, and if it weren't for a nurse, I would be able to pass it. So I felt way more comfortable with the RSR. I was more confident, I mean, because I mean it's a lower speed, so I knew my chances of passing that were much higher than before.
Okay,
If that
so
makes sense.
it does make sense, but take us back a little bit. So before you actually took your RSR and passed it in March of 2022, you sat for your RPR?
Yes,
Okay, when was that?
I started testing for the RPR last November. So in total, it's been 6 months I've been testing, but I've been taking them in chunks. So maybe I only took one test, the lit portion of the RPR in November. And then I believe after that, I attempted in January.
Okay, so probably you took it in January, and then after that you decided, hey, I'm gonna just take my RSR.
Yes, I found out about the RSR in March. So that's when I decided to sign up for that.
Okay. And then when you signed up for the RSR, were you confident that you were gonna pass?
I was more confident than for the RPR, definitely, because I had that experience. So yes, I was more confident with the RSR.
Okay. And did you tell anybody that you were gonna take that when you finally passed your RSR? Did you tell anybody you were gonna sit and take those legs?
I did, just my immediate family, but I mean, I don't think they're too familiar. They don't know the how important it is to me, so they just took it as any other test. So yes, I did,
And
but they didn't understand.
okay, immediately before you took that test, like with the same day, like when you sat down, you log in and the proctor's coming in, did you have that level of confidence, that same level, like, yes, I'm going to be able to pass? Or did you have any doubts that you had to battle with?
Yes and no. I was confident, but at the same time, there's always that little doubt in your head that you're trying to battle. And so I had that little doubt. But I mean, once it started, I felt confident. I knew I was going to pass it. It was just that initial moment of doubt. I mean, when you're about to start, you don't know what to expect. But once you're in it, you're not even thinking about it as much. So yes, it got better after I started my mentality.
Sitting for the RPR definitely helped you become comfortable with the testing procedures. Now, would you recommend that somebody sit for the test before they feel ready? Or at what point would you recommend that somebody sit for the RSR?
I would say once they are passing the 200, the minimum requirements for the RSR, once they are confidently passing those levels, I think they should give it a try because you don't lose anything by trying. And apart from that, you get familiar with the process and it's not as nerve wracking once you start that process. Yes.
And from all your previous attempts before you actually passed, what did it teach you about either the testing process, your practice routine, your mental state? Tell us about that.
I learned so much. First, I learned that it was possible for me. I felt that if I was in testing and it was just a regular day and a regular file, I would have been able to pass. I also knew nerves were a big issue for me, so I tried researching ways to help with that. And I mean, I know there's a lot of issues with the proctor process, with the testing process. So just being able to go through that and understand and being familiar with it, it just helps so much. After the few times I attempted, I was familiar with it. I wasn't nervous, and I think that's part of what helped me also passing the test because I wasn't as terrified as the first time I was. The first time I was so nervous, I couldn't stop shaking, and I think afterwards, I mean, it wasn't as bad. I mean, you still get nervous, but it's definitely not as bad compared to the first time.
Now, what about your actual testing strategy? Did you have a testing strategy? I know you mentioned that there were some theory concepts like the KB and the STW that you said, hey, I'm going to two-stroke those if I have to. Did you have any other testing strategies to help you pass these tests?
So you mean as far as writing or as far as the actual day?
Let's just talk about writing.
Yes, I wasn't worried about briefs so much. I mean, I was practicing for it, but I knew if it came along and I didn't get it or I didn't remember the briefs, I would just write whatever I wrote. So I wasn't too focused on actually getting every single brief or every single phrase that I heard. I was just determined to write what I wrote as I went. I mean, because if you don't know a brief, it's gonna trip you up, and if you try to remember it at that spot, it's just gonna mess you up, and you're gonna drop. So I knew I had to just write without thinking. So that was my strategy, not to just to not. Yeah, I pretty much said it, Katiana.
To basically like to just be whatever you, once you heard something, just write it.
Yes.
Just write it how it sounds, right.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. And now looking back at your practice routine and how you were practicing the months leading up before the test, How many hours, I know you took breaks. You mentioned taking breaks. How many hours would you say you spent practicing on the days that you did practice?
Sometimes on and off all day. It just depended. So sometimes it's just hard to tell because it would vary so much, but anything between 1 to 6 hours or more. I mean, it's hard to really tell, but yeah, definitely at least 1 to 6 hours a day.
Okay. And now that you've passed your RSR, what does that mean to you? What kind of doors has that opened for you?
So I can finally work. So I'm able to finally work, and I have applied for the Washington license, and I am now interning for an agency in Washington. So I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, it's everything you dream of, but that's everything I've been working for is for this moment pretty much.
And now that you have your RSR and you have the leg of the RPR, do you plan on continuing earning certifications? And if so, which ones?
Yes, so I'm planning on testing for the jury charge and then the Q&A portion. And then eventually I want to test for the CSR and then just keep on going after that. I mean, I don't want to limit myself, so I want to see how far I can go. So definitely not stopping right now.
Okay, love it. When you signed up and you passed your RSR Q&A and your RPR lit, what were some things that you did this time around versus the previous attempt when you did not pass the RSR Q&A or the RPR lit?
So I think the first few times I took this test, I still hadn't gotten to Q&A. So I mean, once I started practicing that and practicing at 240 plus, everything was so much slower. And I feel that after I started Q&A practice, that's when everything started. I mean, shift, and I was able to pass everything else. And so I feel just speed building. I think that's what helped the most.
Yes, because when you're doing Q&A, that's just so much faster than when you're just doing a lit file because you're not practicing lit files at 240. You're not practicing well, you could practice jury charge at 240, but you're probably not practicing them at 260, whereas for the Q&A you were. And that overall speed building for Q&A transferred that finger speed. You were able to see those benefits when doing lit and jury charge.
Yes.
And I guess to wrap things up, what is your advice for anyone testing?
So my advice for anyone testing is to test as much as possible. The more experience you have testing, the easier it will get when it comes to the real thing. So don't be afraid to fail and use those failures as a stepping stone. I mean, each test is a new learning experience.
Perfect, perfect. And by testing, do you mean the tests that you're given in school or certification tests?
Both, but I mean, you have to practice testing first. So just whatever they give you in school, and then also the certification test. Don't be afraid to take those as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Seidi. You have been a fabulous participant in the Steno Key program. And again, everybody, if you haven't already checked out Seidi's podcast episode, please definitely check that out. And yeah, we look forward to hearing more about your certifications, all the ones that you'll be getting this year and next year and the years to come. And thank you so much.
Thank you.